for the draft future land use map that we're working on for Imagine Pender 2050. So this is a very informal meeting, and so if you cannot hear, I apologize. Try to get close as you can. I will speak loudly. I'll encourage others to speak loudly, but this is a very informal work session, just kind of talking. There's no public hearing tonight that I'm aware of. No public hearing. So we'll get right into it and do our best to have a good and productive meeting. So we'll do a quick roll call. I am Damian Buchanan. I'll be chairing this meeting tonight. I am present. Mr. Satterfield will not be able to make it. Mr. Jordan will not be able to make it. So I have Mr. Bodwin.
Present.
Mr. Pitts.
Present.
Ms. Mosca.
Present.
And Mr. Keeler.
Present.
Okay, we have a quorum. All right. So I guess we're just going to adopt an agenda, but the agenda is just a presentation and discussion. Is that correct?
We have a public comment.
Okay, we do a public comment.
Yes, sir.
All right, so I'll request a motion be made to adopt our agenda.
I'll make a motion to adopt this evening's agenda.
Second.
All right, all in favor of that?
Aye.
All right, agenda has been adopted. We have no minutes to discuss, so we're going to move right to the public comment. I believe we have a sign up or two.
Laura and Brian. Prevette. Is it Prevette?
So we attended the Penderly meeting. We actually attended the first meeting. I guess there's pictures with evidence. And then we attended the meeting last week. And we were a little surprised to see that Crossroad Communities and Penderly was targeted as a rural community. I think was the term. It was orange.
Rural agriculture, rural neighborhood.
And I think what concerned us was that Penderly's also in the National Register of Historic Places, and we feel like, changing it was developed for agriculture, and to turn it to 2 houses per acre was something that didn't sit well with any of us. We're also looking if it is a change in classification, does that mean property taxes will increase because the property value goes up? If you're currently at 1 house per acre and then they change it to a use where you could have 2 houses per acre, obviously that's going to make the land more valuable, which means you'll pay more in taxes. So that was a concern. I was concerned on how they selected the Crossroad communities and the development areas surrounding them, because Willard was not selected, but Penderly was, and the people at Willard, their children also attend the Penderly Elementary School, so I was concerned. They've got more business than we do. They've got a post office. They're closer to I-40. So I was a little concerned that we were selected, but they weren't. We're on the National Register of Historic Places, and they're not. Maple Hill wasn't selected. There were a couple of other communities that weren't selected. And I just was concerned about ours and wanted to know how they selected these communities and the rural development locations. And find out, if this does go through, when would it actually take place? I know it says 2050, but obviously, and we're really concerned with all the development that y'all show is planned. 421 has threatened and endangered species up and down that corridor where they're looking at developing it. I just feel like there's so much development targeted in this map that we're just really opposed to it. We feel like our county is growing so quickly. We do not mind driving 10 miles to a grocery store or out to eat. Actually, we'd rather drive a little way. Maybe we won't see everyone. But again, I just feel like we didn't know how this was done. Most of our neighbors didn't even know about this at all. Where it was advertised, we're also opposed to if advertising of meetings is going to be in the Star News instead of a Pender County paper. We're going to be opposed to that as well. So that's just my stand. Thank you.
We'll do our best to incorporate some of your questions into it, because I think some of the same questions we have here, we'll try to address your specific questions. Anyone else sign up?
Unless you'd like to speak, Mr. Prevette.
Yeah, she's pretty much dealt with it.
Okay.
The classification change, in my opinion, is,
If you'd like to speak, sir, please come to the microphone.
Yes, the classification change in itself is my main concern when you change it from rural ag to rural neighborhood with a rural crossroad in the center. I mean, again, that's in my opinion, that's an automatic tax increase. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then the second question is, who is gonna make that decision?
That tonight. Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right, good comments, so that we can incorporate into our meeting. Mr. Adams,
Yes, sir.
take it away.
Yes, sir. Real quick though, I just want to be sure, Mr. Bowden, Ms. Mosca, are y'all able to see this screen, and then are the folks here able to see that screen? I just want to be sure the arrangement is such that people can
Yep.
see it.
We
Okay.
can see it.
All right. Very good. Well, I'll be brief because the point of the meeting tonight is not for me to talk, but me to do a little bit more listening, and for y'all to talk, and I can provide answers along the way. But I would be remiss if I didn't give an update on where we stand on the project as a whole. So bear with me for a moment as I catch the board up on where we are. So we are currently in the midst of community engagement window number 2, which is running from April 28th to June 6th. Community engagement window number 1 was in the fall, and that was the foundation of drafting the plan. So we took all that information that we received in community engagement window number 1, spent the winter and early spring drafting the plan, and then community engagement window number 2 is us going back out to the community and asking their opinion on what we came up with. We've had meetings in Hampstead, Penderly, Curry, and Rocky Point to date, and we're gonna have one in Burgall tomorrow night at the Commissioners Chambers, 805 South Walker Street, from 5 to 8 p.m. And then we also have a survey online that we encourage folks to go to our website and take that survey. It's a great opportunity to provide feedback in a way that we can catalog folks aren't able to make it to the in-person meetings. And then I'm gonna cover some highlights of the future land use map, maybe just some things that have changed from Pender 2.0, the existing comprehensive land use plan, and the new future land use plan. So we've revised some of the future land use categories. We've made some changes to some of the rural areas. We've expanded the industrial area on US Highway 421. A big component of this project has been identifying areas to focus growth, particularly in Hampstead and then south of Highway 210. And then discouraging dense development in flood zones or other environmentally sensitive areas. So a couple other things I want to hit on is the rural crossroads future land use category, which Mr. and Ms. Prevette were talking about there just a few minutes ago. So a little bit of background on that. There are some rural crossroad areas in the county. When I say rural crossroads, I mean areas where there are state highways that intersect. So in Maple Hill, Highway 50, Highway 53, Highway 421, and Malpas Corner Road that are already currently within a neighborhood mixed use future land use category. And we felt that that was an inappropriate future land use category because that is also applied to areas in Rocky Point and Hampstead. And so we felt that there needed to be a separation between what is appropriate mixture of uses in Hampstead and Rocky Point and what is appropriate mixture of uses in rural areas. And so we created this future land use category called rural crossroads. And the purpose is to support and encourage non-residential uses at those key rural intersections. Some of those intersections or areas are Maple Hill, Willard, Penderly, Malpas Corner and 421, 210, 421, and then Little Kelly. I will say after the Penderly meeting, I hope this is reflective of how we're trying to be responsive. The feedback that we received helped inform us that we got that one wrong. So we're going to go back and revise the map in Penderly to reflect the feedback that we got from the community at that meeting. This is a future land use map. I highlighted some of those areas or circled them in red just to demonstrate where some of those rural crossroads areas are.
What update are you guys planning on making for Penderly?
We're going to take it back to rural agriculture.
So no orange or no pink in that area?
Yes, sir.
But there's already commercial zoning in the center of Penderly.
Right.
So
There's commercial zoning. The future land use map just has RA other than where the school is, I think it's called office and institutional or in civic. So we're gonna,
There's more commercial area in that. We had a planning board member that owned property right there.
right,
So
right.
that's
We're
not
gonna-
gonna be, so one of the questions I have, and I'm gonna let you go, but was that we have a tremendous amount of legal non-conforming uses. This was like one of the main issues that we were having before we even started this, to making sure those are recognized on the map. And so my question is, are they recognized on the map?
They will be, and part of the change is that the rural agricultural category is gonna be a little bit broader in terms of allowing more non-commercial uses than it does in its current iteration. So again, and just for the record, this is a policy map, this is not the zoning map. So legal nonconformities would not be established or become nonconforming as a result of this map being adopted. This map will then inform future regulation, and so,
But one of the issues we're having is that businesses are legally non-conforming and wanting to expand their business or do something to their business, and they were basically not consistent with policy because of the future land use map.
and I think that's where the planning board has the flexibility to say, and the board of commissioners, of course, have the flexibility to say, understanding that the map says this, when we take a narrow look at your property, your situation, it makes sense to do something different.
If we change zoning that's inconsistent with the future land use map, what is the impact on that future land use map?
It updates the future land use map to reflect what the most appropriate future land use category is to the zoning district. So again, if we have a rural agricultural future land use category that allows for more non-residential development at key intersections, then we can achieve some of reduction of those non-conforming situations through the rural agriculture future land use category. But the benefit of the rural crossroads is we really hone in on areas where we expect there to be commercial development if there's not already commercial.
What type of commercial development would be consistent in this new rural crossroads?
Things that you might imagine. So you see like Dollar Generals at the rural crossroads. So not that that's a specific business that we're recruiting or anything like that, but the broad scale is businesses that provide services to folks in rural areas. Whether that's a retail store, whether that's a restaurant, a grill, something where folks can come together, something where folks can get resources without having to drive 20 minutes to Wallace, 20 minutes to Wilmington or Burgall.
How about for approved projects that have not come out of the ground yet, that are, let's say they're commercial in focus? And I'm looking on the map and I can see maybe a couple that we've approved that might apply to this, that are now a different, more of a residential zoning. How will those be treated?
They're vested. If they've been approved, they have vested rights unless they expire, if they don't proceed with their.
But if they have to make a change, and typically they're gonna have to make a change, now they're subject to, and it's like, okay, we're stuck.
Maybe, and the zoning districts haven't changed. This is just policy and vision moving forward. But part of what we've done, and Adam has been insistent on this, is each future land use category is designed to have flexibility in allowing a mixture of uses. So we wanted to stay away from just being explicitly, this is an only residential category, or this is an only commercial category. There are a couple of those, like the heavy commercial and economic development areas, but we wanted to allow flexibility for that incremental change, or to allow some non-residential development in more traditional residential categories.
But there are areas on this map that are, let's say, residential performance that are built out neighborhoods where it would be, it's gonna have people there that'll be driving and so forth, but they're being recognized as rural agriculture on this map. I mean, it makes more sense that more development would happen near those developments, because of their success and because people are living there. And because eventually you're gonna have commercial growth around that to support those neighborhoods, that more people will come for those areas. But those are not being recognized. There seems to be a lot of rural RP on the map that's shown as RA in your future land use map.
And I would say there's a chicken and egg scenario. Which comes first? There's the existing zoning, and then there's the future land use map. In my professional opinion, the future land use map sets the guidance for future changes to the zoning map. Now, certainly existing developments, and we can talk about which ones you're referring to, but certainly existing developments, we don't want to say that by changing the future land use map, we're going to prohibit people from making modifications to an existing development or to making modifications to an existing home within an existing development. But the point being of the future land use map is to look forward, not necessarily to match our future land use map with our existing zoning, because we want to, after this process, we then want to move forward with making changes to the zoning districts that better reflect the policies and vision of this comprehensive plan.
But if it's already developed, then why wouldn't we make it?
So, one thing I was just thinking about,
I wanna follow.
if we established, if we recognize existing neighborhoods as, let's say, medium density, then that could support, justify, lead to more medium density patterns in that vicinity, which creates more sprawl conditions and kind of unchecked growth.
Is there an overlay of what the 2.0 maps is, what the 2050 map is, and what the zoning map is? Is it so that, you know, as opposed to everybody trying to visualize it in their head or try to come up with assumptions, and they're just thinking about which regions that they live in the county or specific examples, a visual overlay of how those things, because that was one of the notes, and after the Privet said, you know, about up in Pender Lee in the change in classifications, something would change management to be able to communicate this to the public, especially the lay public. You know, I'm not a planner, I'm not in real estate, so following a lot of this for people that are out of this, confusing as hell.
Yeah.
So, you know, without having overlays or things that they can compare it to, as opposed to, you know, spending hundreds of hours studying what previous plans are comparing, that would be helpful, I think, as well, that for that discussion, but also to get people on board. Because a lot of that explanation is circuitous on the fact that, you know, future land use plan is going to be in you know, that's what guides us, and that's what guides commissioners, and that's what guides the planning board in decisions. But we can use it when it's helpful to us, but when it's not helpful to whatever decision we want to make, then we can just do whatever we want to, because this is just a guidance. But really, where people are purchasing, just like we had a case a couple weeks ago where the county was trying to rezone parcel of property, and that was a residential area. A lot of that land was residential abutted, and people, when they purchased, could have looked at the 2.0 plan and said that this is going to be residential forever. But then the guidance, because of the future land use plan, says, well, we can use it, but we have the gravity, we have the levity to be able to do whatever we want if it's in the best interest of the winds of change. And shouldn't the future land use plan be a little bit more stringent as a guiding light, or as opposed to we use it when we want to, but we throw it away when we don't?
I think the response to that is it's all dependent upon the community. The community, our job is to get feedback from the community and develop policy based on that feedback. It's the elected officials, the appointed officials who make those decisions. It's them setting the course on how much stock they put into these policies. I would say it is not a best practice to constrict yourself so much in a plan that you do not have any room to change course. These circumstances change, situations change. I don't think it's the best practice to constrict yourself to the point where you can only follow one course on each piece of property in the county and not have any room to deviate.
I mean, I tend to think like as a guiding principle at a very high level. We definitely want to have room for commercial growth, right? We've had this explosion in residential population and people want services. People don't want to get stuck, you know, going all the way down to Mayfair. They want a couple restaurants, they want some services here. And I'm not sure if this plan accomplishes that, because I have to look at it a little bit more, but as a guiding principle, I think we don't want to discourage commercial development. And I'm just looking at this map. So there are so the areas like down in front of the apartments that were built off of 17, is that this real dark purple area?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And which is a residential neighborhood? So residential neighborhood,
It would be regional center.
regional center?
So
Okay.
that is akin to regional mixed use in terms of what you might be familiar with. So high density, residential, but more than likely commercial, or a mixture of the two.
Okay.
So we're gonna work on the coloring a little bit to have them stand out a little bit more than they currently do. But the dark purple is the highest intensity residential density category.
So what is red? Is red industrial?
Red is heavy commercial. That's like probably most similar to light industrial on the current future land use map, and that was in response to a lot of feedback that we got from the steering committee, and similar to what you were saying, there needs to be areas on the east side of the county that allow for people in the trades to have warehouses or small storefronts with warehouse space behind it, or storage facilities, or other services that don't the commercial services that don't necessarily require a lot of exposure. to
Dutch Square.
passersby.
Dutch Square, like in New Hampshire County.
Yes, sir.
Like just like a large business park.
So
It's not as intensive as 421.
Yeah, I'm looking at the red, so the it looks like that's probably Transfer Station Road I'm looking at, so that, I know that was rezoned as light industrial.
So you make a very good point about what you're talking about, because one of the questions I think will help with your answer, because I agree with some of it, and then I also understand staff about guiding. And once this is adopted, and the public, says, well, we don't want to see this and so forth, but once it is adopted, who uses this? Who is using this primarily?
Primarily staff, planning board, elected officials,
And the development
developers.
community.
Right.
The development community, the landowners are looking at this and saying, what does Pender County want to see?
Exactly.
And so they say, okay, we want to see this, or this is occurring here, so we're going to invest money because there's, the market takes place, there's a need here, we have an opportunity to buy land because there's a few neighborhoods around here and there's probably a good need to have a community grocery store here, or a gas station here. And so I think that's, it's a guiding principle because it helps direct the traffic of what Pender County would like to see from those, whether inside the county or outside the county, the money coming here to invest and develop property. And then we as staff and the appointed officials and elected officials kind of help make that determination based on what they're asking for. Does it make sense or not? Would that be accurate?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, the lack of, or some of this area, I think that it's very important, and we've heard this many times, that it's very important to, protect a lot of the agricultural land of the county. It brings significant tax base and wealth to our county, and it's important because it's a historical part of our county. But there is a growth pattern happening, and most of it's 210 and south.
Right.
So when we talk about 210 and then like highways like, Shaw Highway, for example, this body denied a gas station, which could be considered a crossroads,
Right.
but the county commissioners said yes to it, I believe. So that gas station is now there, right there at Shaw Highway and Route, 53 or 50? And there's a large neighborhood right there too. That's not reflected on this map. that's growth pattern there, that's coming there. So when we talk about, are we showing and reflecting growth pattern in the future land use map? Are we?
Well, the RA would support a gas station, you know, so that rezoning did.
Would that be a
result-
crossroads though?
It could be, right, but the RA still would support commercial businesses that would serve the community in that sense. So that rezoning didn't result in an automatic change to the future land use map because it was consistent with the future land use map in the sense that limited commercial can go in that RA district. And emphasis on limited there, that we felt that was a limited use. It's a well-traveled highway, and really an ideal intersection for a use like that. I think staff was supportive of that
Mhm.
right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Because it made practical sense to us.
But most of Shaw Highway is RP,
Right.
but you're showing RA on the future land use map. So what I'm saying is like, you already have a large development there. I don't expect that other RP land on that property, that along Shaw Highway is going to also stay agricultural, because eventually if it is sold or owned, they're gonna put houses there that's gonna reflect like an R15, which would be some type of neighborhood residential.
There's also multiple sand pits on that road, which are kind of commercial in use, but I'm just seeing a lot of brown, and I know we're not just focused on 17. I know we're looking at the whole county, but looking just what I'm most familiar with in Hampstead going down towards Wilmington, I see a lot of brown where I know that there's all kinds of little commercial businesses in that brown zone. And that's why I'm like, it doesn't seem to make sense to me.
And, you know, just to reiterate from earlier, you know, these categories, except for heavy commercial and the economic development area or the industrial areas, they are designed to be, you know, mixed use. So there is room, and it is appropriate that there would be commercial there now and in the future.
But the decision still comes back, if they're gonna do something commercial in that brown zone, it's the future land use map is residential. So if they wanna do something commercial or expand their little commercial business, they've gotta come before the planning board,
Well,
right?
not necessarily, so do we have the?
They have to come up for the planning board
description?
anyways, it just may not be consistent with the maps when they.
No, I'm saying that for an existing business, let's say an existing business, a hair cutting place, we'll say. Something like that, and they want to expand, they want to do something else.
Mhm.
Do they have to, like, are they able to expand, or are they now beholden to these, do they need some sort of exception from the planning board or planning staff?
The property's probably already zoned general business if it's on 17, I would bet.
Okay, so zoning, land use, two different
Separate.
things.
Right. But
Okay.
what I would say is, now that we have this future, hopefully have this future land use category that allows for that type of non-residential development, commercial development on Highway 17, we would then craft a zoning district that allows for commercial development and residential development, so that there's, again, as Adam said, a potential for mixture of uses. So you wouldn't be getting these rezoning requests on Highway 17 where it says, well, this is low-density residential on the future land use map, but it's never gonna be developed into 1-acre lots on Highway 17. There are some of those that this board has seen in the past couple of years, right? So we've tried to correct that situation with the future, but not.
Wouldn't we make that call now, though? I mean, we know that
Probably.
it's gonna become more and more valuable over time that people want commercial services.
Yeah, all
I
we've
mean,
seen of
right
17
now,
is
we've
commercial.
got
Right.
X number of lots, like, approved that have not come out of the ground, which is a huge number. And like, people are like really vying for commercial stuff.
Mr. Boone, I just wanted to clarify that the brown that is in Pender 2.0 that we currently have,
Mhm.
that is medium density residential, that is different than the brown on this draft map.
Okay.
Daniel, and we pretty much
That's-
shanghaied this group presentation right
Yeah.
from the
That's all right.
start, so.
We're not trying to give you a
Yeah.
tough time, but
So-
I know,
Please.
I'm wondering if some of the questions we're asking are in your presentation.
Yeah, I'll go through it. I just have a few more slides.
Okay.
Yeah. And you know, this is a street view shot of Willard on Highway 11. So one of the things that we've started talking about is focused growth areas, and that has been the biggest takeaway of this plan, is being intentional about where growth is gonna occur in the county. And how do we reflect that on this map? The two biggest growth areas, regional center and neighborhood center categories, have these characteristics. There is a focus on a mixture of commercial uses and higher density residential. So allowing commercial and then higher density residential, and these are areas where infrastructure exists, water and sewer, or it is planned, provide services to residents in the surrounding area. As you were mentioning, Mr. Bowman, people don't want to drive to Mayfair to get a burger, so we got PTs now across the street. And it supports a balanced tax base. That's been one of the biggest priorities as an organization that's come down from the elected officials, is balancing the tax base so there's not such a big burden on the residential taxpayers.
Another key point.
Right,
there.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so we were mindful of that as an organizational goal when we crafted this future land use map. And so just to cover a couple of those areas where we've identified as regional center or neighborhood center are in Hampstead, Scotts Hill, around the bypass interchanges on 210, Hoover Road, and 17, and then in Rocky Point. And one of the greatest steps forward we've made, I think, is the coordination with utilities and planning and getting on the same page about how growth is going to occur, because those two departments need to be symbiotic in their relationship and how they view growth in the county. And then another really important topic is the preservation of the rural character and agricultural heritage of the county. And that goes hand in hand with focusing growth and development in key areas. So if we focus growth in, say, Hampstead, and then as it transitions to Rocky Point, that alleviates the development pressure on the rural parts of the county. Again, coordination between planning and utilities is essential for this. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is this plan has a conservation toolkit in it, which is, as the name implies, it's a toolkit that talks about resources or things the county can do to better conserve the rural and agricultural heritage of the county. What can we do to be, to preserve more farmland? How can we discourage development in these areas? That's something that we want to explore further, whereas this plan talks about it in a broad sense. We want to dig deeper into that, into a plan on its own, farmland preservation plan, as an example.
That would have to be a voluntary plan.
Absolutely, yes, sir. And then the last slide, where folks can learn more. So that's it from the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Do you quickly want to go over these different colors?
Yes, sir. Let me pull this up here.
And y'all do have copies of
Yeah.
the plan, they're bound, like over your gavel. And if you turn to page, chapter 3, starting on page 32, hopefully it's the same page in that version. You'll see the beginning of the explanations.
So the first category is conservation and recreation. That encompasses game lands, county parks, preserved land, and then existing golf courses that were shown as recreation, a future land use category in and of itself on Pender 2.0's future land use map. And part of the reason that they were shown separately is because they were part of the open space requirement for the development. And so we wanted to acknowledge that on the conservation and recreation future land use category.
So that would provide, no development, just natural lands. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Natural lands, if the state wanted to come in and do a educational center or a visitor center in Holly Shelter or something like that, that would be supported, but otherwise discouraging development.
Okay.
It could encompass like county parks as well.
So then we've got the rural agricultural future land use category, which is the beige color on the map. And similar to as it exists in Pender 2.0, it is the predominant future land use category. Primary uses, agriculture, forestry, things like agritourism. That's something that we've seen a lot of growth in, is agritourism as an industry.
Do you know how much money the county's brought in from agritourism?
I do not. But I can try to find out.
I'm sure, I don't,
Yeah.
it's probably minimal compared to the
Right.
beach tourism.
And then single-family detached homes and manufactured homes. Again, the point is to preserve the rural character of these areas. Things, secondary uses are things that would also be supported. Rural scale businesses, those businesses that support agricultural uses, those are supported non-residential development types. And I'm working from most restrictive in terms of development to least restrictive, or least intense in terms of use to most intense. And that's how they're laid out in the plan. So rural neighborhood was a way for us to identify areas where, for example, I think Shaw Highway is a good example, where high density didn't necessarily make sense, and when I say high density, I mean 5-6 units an acre, like the development style here in Hampstead. But it's not necessarily rural agriculture. It doesn't need to be 1 acre lots.
So Dane, that's a question that I had
Sure.
with rural agriculture, because looking through, I think the key point with all of these descriptions and all of these denotations is the density. And with rural agriculture, I was stoked when I came to this first one, and I've talked with Justin. I said, this is awesome with how much rural agriculture there is up for the planning in just pockets. But when I look at this, when it says residential density of 1 unit an acre or less, that does not encourage keeping these agricultural. That just says that we're gonna have a little bit, I mean, we have that one off of 210 or whatever, that's 10 acre lots for the upscale thing. Like 1 acre lots is not going to discourage the conversion of these from farmland to residential communities.
Okay.
Yeah, well, so the challenge with that is the majority of the county is zoned in a way that reflects this future land use map. Rural agriculture, that's a zoning as well as a future land use category. And so the way the majority of the county is currently zoned, there is a 1 acre lot size minimum. So removing that, like, it wouldn't be practical or even possible to take that away from.
But we just had a discussion that the zoning in the land use plan didn't need to be, it's about plans and about what we wanted in this, and it didn't have to be consistent. So it's either gotta be consistent or it doesn't need to be consistent.
Right. I don't think increasing the development or decreasing the development density is gonna change the development style in the western part of the county. There's very little development pressure north and west of Bergall. So if we were to change that to 5 acre minimum lots, I don't think that's gonna have necessarily any impact from 1 acre lots.
So then why not?
Let me, go ahead.
No,
I wish Mr. Jordan was here, because he will tell you, I think you've said it to this body before, that one of the reasons it's 1 acres in this rural agriculture is because there is a practice, or a very common practice amongst farming families, that as, maybe a son or a daughter wants to have a property on the land and maybe can work within the farm or not, that they would carve off an acre for their family. And so that allowed for that's how I believe it started historically, was that it would allow someone to carve off a piece of property for their kids, or for someone to work and to give them land in some return. And so that's how that came about. Now certainly, a developer, as you probably see, are gonna wanna have as many possible lots as they can. But there's also the flip side. So like when farmers come to you and say, we need to save this, that, and the other, and we need to make sure it's, but then when they want to sell it, they want to sell it for much as they possibly can do. So I do think you might have pushback from the farming community, even though they want to keep it agriculture, to say, well, you got to allow us to carve something off, you know, or do something with our property. So I think you're going to see pushback on making it less dense than one unit an acre.
But if we make it less dense in the future land use plan, where it should be consistent with whatever, but the zoning still stays with 1 acre minimums, a family farm that carves out an acre is gonna have a heck of a lot less pushback than D.R. Horton coming in with,
But you have to be
able do it.
consistent with your ordinance. You know, you have to treat everyone the same. So if a family farm wants to carve 1 acre off, they can do that. That's, the ordinance allows that. But if someone else buys all of it, carves it all up into 1 acre lots, that's the same ordinance.
And part of the discouragement of the development too is where the infrastructure is. So,
Yes, that was where I was gonna go with it. Where's
But
the
we're
sewer?
talking 25 years, where it's talking, we can talk about Rocky Point right now that doesn't have septic, but it could get septic in the next 25 years. Same with
Sewer.
Penderly or Watha or any of those places.
I think
Right,
it's
and-
inevitable that Rocky Point will have sewer in the next 10 years.
and that's what this plan talks about. It says discourage extension of municipal style utilities into those areas. That's another way of discouraging that development pressure to move into those rural agricultural areas. So it's not just the density that's shown on there, but it's also the type of infrastructure that's available to serve that development.
Yeah, if you look at Brunswick County, I mean, they're 20 years ahead of us, realistically. And if you look at their growth pattern, it just follows the sewer. Wherever the sewer is where the growth is. It just follows all over the place. So we have some limitations in sewer in the western part of the county, but I do know there's probably a lot of, you know, so there is no sewer, so then we have developers that are coming with their own treatment plants that are gonna be run by HOAs, which is not ideal, but that's what they have done. So there's, what, 2,500 homes that are not built, 2,000 homes in Rocky Point right now that are planned?
More than that.
More than that. So I mean, it's like, plan is larger than the town of Burgaw. You know, so I think you're right that wherever sewer is tends to be where it's easier than septic tanks. But I don't know how you split that baby where if you're gonna allow someone to carve off a lot for family, maybe it's 2 acres, right? You know, you have to have that same ordinance to apply to somebody else, and they can carve the whole thing up into that, like what Saratoga is that way. You know.
But then you have the flip side where I actually built a house for a client that had to carve an acre off of their farm. And they were mad because they had to carve a whole acre off.
Right.
Because the house and the septic and the well, we could have easily done that on a half acre. But they had to give a whole acre over.
And a lot of people that I've spoken to over the years in the rural area, they feel they should have the right to do more than one home on 1 acre. You know, they feel like they should be able to get more out of their property than the county allows. So there's that other side to it too.
I think most homeowners, or most landowners, when they want to do something, think they should be able to do it.
Right. But one thing I want to mention, if there's a benefit to not having county water and sewer kind of run all over the place like Brunswick. It's an opportunity for us to kind of guide, work in tandem with utilities to guide where it makes sense for that infrastructure to go, rather than just seeking customers where we can find them, you know, acknowledging that we're gonna grow, but where does it make sense to grow? And we felt that it's inevitable for it to come up from Wilmington on the southern part of the county, but we tried to limit that while preserving the existing patterns in the rest of the county. The majority of the county, as you all can see on the map.
So the next future land use category is rural neighborhood, and again, bless you, finding the intent of this category is to identify those areas where growth is likely to continue pushing, but we don't expect to see the density that is in Hampstead. You know, the existing developments, 4, 5, 6 units an acre, we don't expect that level of density. And so those are in, you know, Long Creek, up Highway 421, and then in some existing developments on the north side of Hampstead along 17.
I would think that everything in the Wilmington Metropolitan Planning Organization's jurisdiction would be at least rural neighborhood, given the growth pattern, the population boom, the pressure that Wilmington's seeing, businesses coming to Wilmington and us, that would all be, or, you know, because it's in their, we share a partnership with them to help provide transportation, because we all understand that area under 210 is part of the larger Wilmington metropolitan area.
Exactly. And the areas, the primary area that's not is south, sort of in the Long Creek area between Rocky Point and 421. There's a lot of flood zone in that area. So again, one of our goals, discouraging dense development in flood zones. That's why we kept that area rural agriculture. And then along the river, along the northeast Cape Fear River between, say, Hampstead and Rocky Point, we had that as rural agriculture. It's in a flood prone area, and then close to the game land, so maintaining that development pattern.
All right, that's a valid point. What about, like I was going back to the RP areas where we're definitely seeing growth in 210, a lot of that's rural agriculture, that's unrealistic. You know, like Shaw Highway, you have RP all through there. And that's gonna be developed into residential performance, not agricultural land. I've yet to see but one case that they came to down zone property.
I think Shaw Highway, I think you're right. I think we do need to take another look at Shaw Highway.
At least the southern portion
I
of it.
agree. I think we do need to take another look at Shaw Highway.
And that area along 210, yeah, I mean, you already have some large developments going in that have bought a lot of land that are carved up in big RA style lots,
Right.
Songbird, which is a very large development.
Yeah.
But I don't think that all of that's gonna be RA. I think everything that's RP along 210 should at least be given consideration to be rural neighborhood.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
If we can find.
Because that's kind of guiding our future. You know, that's realistically what's gonna happen.
If we can find areas to be able to accommodate that sort of thing and stay out of the more heavily flood-prone areas.
I understand the floodplain, I'm sensitive to that, you know,
that'd be ideal.
definitely sensitive to that. But there's gonna be building restrictions and problems that are gonna work itself out with that as well. As long as our ordinance is at least fair to that,
Right.
or encourages clustering rather than building in it.
Right.
And that is another thing that is, you know, noted and encouraged in the plan is for the county to find incentives and programs,
Like, there's some land.
to have conservation subdivisions.
Yeah, we should, because it would make sense, it would probably help us. And thankfully, we at least have the open space with some of these PD districts where like, hey, if you do open space, we'll give you something over here, and they do it. And all of a sudden you have this wetland that just stays alone, you know, and the water goes there. But also too, like on Rocky Point with this economic zone, is that all wet down there? Is that what you're saying, below the brown along the Cape Fear River? There's the gray up I-40. I would think that if you've been in industrial and economic areas, you're gonna wanna have some workforce housing. And so there may be needs for density for apartments even in the future down the road.
Right, so between the river and I-40 and Rocky Point, most of that is an existing sand mine, and we didn't necessarily see that changing, but we did
I just thought,
transition.
yeah, I thought someone was, I looked at that because I saw that it was wet.
Right.
But some of that's dry.
Right.
And so that's why I was like,
And, and if we, you know, I think that's where, this is a living document, this is designed to be a living document. If Martin Marietta sells that land and we begin to see some residential development, then that might be what prompts us to say, okay, we need to take another look. This is no longer an economic development area, it's no longer a mine, it's something else. We need to take a look at this area specifically and revise this map.
okay.
So it is a balancing act of existing development and future development.
Any other rural, this is good, we're going through each one.
Right.
I mean, just, yeah, I mean, going out on 210, so where the new school is being built, kind of looks like, I guess it's falling into the brown category.
Right.
The purplish is what? Why did we?
The purplish is neighborhood center.
Apartments.
No, I think smaller scale apartments in the neighborhood center, I think
Townhomes.
Right.
Like if it were a multifamily building, it would be like 8 or 10 rather than 24 or 30.
And it looks like the purple seems to be right along what we talked about years ago, was trying to keep density around the nodes of transportation where they intersect, you know, the intersections with the bypass or the 40.
Exactly.
Because you know, you put the density there, and it, you know, no one wants density next to their house, but at least it's next to the highway, so the traffic, they get right on the, they're mostly there in density because it's a little bit potentially lower price point, and they're probably working class potentially, and they get in the highway to drive into Wilmington or wherever.
Right. And the intent is not to just string or sprawl the
Right.
development along. Exactly.
Keep it centralized.
Right. Mr. Bodwin, your question, yes, it is in what's currently called residential neighborhood. And Adam has a really good anecdotal, maybe less anecdotal, but a story. One of his first projects was the rezoning of the school property. And it was in medium density residential. And he found it difficult to try and articulate an argument as to why something in the medium density residential should be rezoned to office and institutional, right? It's a really good point. And so that's something that sticks in my mind as to why we have a flexibility and allowance for a mixture of uses in almost all of these zoning, or in all of these categories, is for there to be an allowance for non-residential development in areas that are primarily gonna develop residentially. Those services need, you know, there are needed services in those areas, institutional uses, civic uses, churches, you know, those types of uses are gonna occur around residential development. And so we wanted to recognize that and support that through this plan. So Mr.
What else would qualify as a civic use? Is that just something that's needed in a neighborhood? Would you define it that way?
Community centers, like a Moose Lodge sort of thing.
Government buildings, post office,
Churches, daycares,
gyms.
Daycares would
gyms.
not,
parks.
would daycares be it?
not necessarily.
Not
I mean,
office
right
institutional.
now,
Church
off
daycare.
of Country Club, that is Brown, so, and there is a daycare
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Hospitals, you know, even
Clinic.
clinics, dentists, all sorts of things like that.
That's in
as
the
well.
O&I zoning or rural neighborhood?
Those things, I'm sure, are permitted in O and I, but the future land use category of residential neighborhood would allow those types of things.
A small store, like a
Yeah.
convenience store of some
Right.
sort?
Exactly.
O and I
Okay.
in the
Well,
tech
we
district
skipped
today,
ahead.
like restaurants, coffee shops are allowed in O&I, cause it's a fair mixture with those institutional uses.
Hair cutting place, stuff like that.
We're talking about neighborhood center again? Or,
I think we're talking about residential neighborhood.
okay.
Yes, sir. And just to read it, in terms of what type of non-residential uses would be in residential neighborhood, we're talking about the brown on this draft map. This is in the secondary uses, so not the main thing we expect to see in that area, but a secondary use in this category would be small nodes of neighborhood scale commercial or office uses and neighborhood scale institutional uses such as community centers or civic uses, which is, like we said, religious assemblies or government buildings,
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
How about like a neighborhood restaurant, a small neighborhood restaurant? Or a
Yes,
pub
sir.
or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Cause if, let's say there's a large rural neighborhood area, the primary use is single family. If it was all developed as just single family homes, then we fail, right? The idea is that there's a mixture, there's opportunities within that. It's not just uniform.
Yeah, I mean,
one
it's
way.
key to getting people off the roads. That if we have convenience, they're not out on 17, getting in an accident. So that's where I'm coming from.
Mr. Bowden, all your uses, I'm listening here, but I'm struggling with the part of the map we're talking about. What district?
I was just looking at the, what is it, the residential neighborhood?
Okay, so residential neighborhood, okay, what you're talking about is like, these pubs, small little spots, mom and pop places that pop up, want to do a business. We see them on 17, but we could also see them in other places.
Right.
So I think there's, like,
looking at this, there's
ironclad,
that's the number one color, right? There's a lot of brown.
but is it the
Am I-
same color brown?
Is it the same
The
color?
residential neighborhood,
I can't tell.
I'm trying to figure out which colors the
My
resident.
eyes are going.
We're
I
gonna-
think-
we're gonna work on that.
Yeah, it's residential neighborhood, that's right. So all
Okay.
this is residential neighborhood.
So everything
Yeah,
around
okay.
on Country Club could allow for little pockets of
Exactly,
old house converted into a little,
exactly,
okay, excellent.
incremental.
And I will just, I know we're gonna continue to run through these, but I'll just make mention that, because you just said Country Club. On Country Club, that Hawksbill Cove, they have like, what? 150,000 square feet of
Oh, okay.
50,000,
commercial?
yeah.
50,000?
square foot of commercial.
But it's all showing as yellow on this map.
Right,
So when we get there, I don't wanna detract, I'll let you keep going. When we
But I-
get there, I just want.
But I'm glad that's in there, because I think it's important. We're seeing that trend in our country and our communities, you know, where a small mom and pop or someone wants to take a chance and they have an idea and they want to do it. And to allow that, even if it doesn't always, you know, it's kind of a pocket in the middle of something, it still would work. And it doesn't just detract from the residential charm or the community itself.
Exactly.
All right,
So I think
can we skip ahead? We're on,
Yeah, we talked about rural crossroads.
I want to talk a little bit more about that.
Sure, yes, sir.
Is it Little Kelly? Is that is that recognized in this?
Is
Okay.
where the rezoning was?
Mhm.
Yes, sir.
Okay. When we put this on the map, it doesn't mean that if they, you know, I thought that the Little Kelly was successful. I know it had pushback, but if it was like if it said it was a mom and pop, I don't think anyone had a problem with it.
Right.
But it was because it was a larger national chain.
Right.
And that just happens to be the trend, right? But it allows for us to put conditional rezonings to make it fit the character. On these rural crossroads, is there anything gonna be in there saying we encourage certain, building standards?
Absolutely. So that's something that we really wanted to hone in on in these rural areas, is talk about, what is the character of these rural crossroads? Because they're gonna be in areas that have the potential to one, of course, be frequently traveled by drivers, but then two, see more types of maybe pedestrian or bicycle customers coming to frequent their business. And so we didn't want them to detract from the residential opportunities around them. And so identifying the sense of place, I think is the right way to put it, is something that we thought long and hard about on these rural crossroads descriptions. And so, I'm sorry.
No,
I was just gonna say, so yes, buffering is important, but then also allowing for a concept that we've talked a lot about is someone to park once and be able to go to multiple places. So if there's say a bookstore and a grill and a coffee shop, convenience center, whatever it is, not have to drive across to each of them, but to be able to park once, walk to each of them. That's something that we've talked a lot about. Like smaller parking lots, in some instances allowing for natural surfaces or pervious surfaces, particularly in rural areas. Those are all things that we talked about.
okay.
They really, kind of designed as places where, people will come together. These are natural kind of gathering places. A lot of them are existing in some form already. Like the Willard community or some of the crossroads along 421 where people are already going. There might be a gas station or, some local businesses there. that
Vegetable
kind of-
stand?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And so you're looking to eliminate though in Penderley from this map that we have,
Yes, sir.
but the other 1, 2, 3,
I would encourage you to consider that the commercial zoning that's currently already there has some consistency with that. I understand the removal of the rural neighborhood, but to have something, an opportunity, especially the center, that real downtown center, even if it's historic, those historic ideas have to be recognized, I would believe, potentially. I don't think anyone's gonna knock them down, but like, there's a commercial area right there that could probably use it, because there are a lot of homebound people that may need to be able to get somewhere easy that's not driving all the way to Burgall for it.
Do we have a zoomed in version of Penderly?
But there's like right in that, where it's designed, right in that center is some mixed use, I believe, and
If
some
you-
commercial.
Yeah, real quick, if y'all could refer to, there's one of these pages, this.
Back of the first, back of the first one.
Yeah, the second page, right, the back of the first page, so that, we could just take a quick look at Penderly. So, this was our initial idea, and after receiving some feedback from the community, we decided to downgrade this, but I think in line with what you're saying, you know, south of 11, which is really, that loop, right? where The
Yes.
school is at the other side of the loop, and south of 11, you know, we certainly could consider keeping just that as rural crossroads, but then everything else around it is rural agriculture. So that way, we'll get some commercial uses, and that's consistent with the commercial zoning today.
That's currently there.
Right, there's the school, the grill, some churches, community center, the gym, you know, Pender County Gym over there. There's a lot of empty parcels. There's not really farming going on in that center, in that area I've just described, but there's some empty lots that are vacant that could be some places for some commercial kind of
I mean,
infill.
That little, I don't know what you call it, the shape it is, but, yeah, horseshoe. You have some residential performance in there, you have O&I, you have industrial, you had all types of stuff in there. Now, if you looked at that area, that town center, obviously there's something going on there that people come there for a reason. It is designed to be the center. It didn't, you know,
Right.
you can see the houses, how they was designed, they're all very similar. There's no sewer out there that I'm aware of. Soil's black, so it doesn't perk. It's all farmland. But if you were able to, you know, so I don't know how that comes along there, but just to think about that. And it's almost, most of it's already more intense than what we're talking about with rural crossroads.
Right.
So I don't know how that makes sense there.
We can talk about that, and we certainly want to get the feedback from the community as well. But
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, but
we
yeah.
can consider that.
Well, because I mean, to what Mr. Buchanan said earlier, making things consistent with what's currently there.
Right.
If we don't have a different plan for development later on, because it's just gonna be what it's gonna be, because it's already developed, why not make it so that it's
Really shown.
consistent?
Yeah.
Because then what happens too is, let's say that little corner piece of RA, you have someone come and they want to rezone it to GI, and it touches it.
Right.
And you're saying, well, it's not a spot zoning, so it's already around it. Usually that ends up being favorable, you know, so.
And one thing, like you know, I love the idea of the right business going back into the old hosiery building.
Sure.
But I've never really been comfortable with the GI zoning on such a large tract in the center of Penderly. But again, I think there could be an industry that would be a good fit for that, you know, and fit for the community and bring some jobs there. But that's the only kind of outlier, really.
Yeah, it's just a
In terms
very
of rural
intensive,
crossroads.
it's like this little one spot's very
Right.
intense. I understand the removing of the neighborhood to RA, but it's not reflective.
Right.
And I know this isn't public comment, but is that still consistent with what you guys are looking for? You're just not looking for all of it to be rural, or what is it, rural neighborhood?
No, I think you're missing it. Some of those lots are vacant, you know, just because they're small held.
Yeah, please come up.
Trying to record this, I'm sorry.
It should be online. There should be.
Yeah, I just wanna make sure.
Okay.
I don't agree with that, at all, and I've listened to y'all talk, and Shaw, oh my God, it's the only area in the state that's developed a high hazard area for pounds of pepper in there and see them, you know, have a wildfire. I disagree with that. I disagree with the Penderly. I don't think industrial needs to be there. I don't think you're gonna find a business to take the whole hosiery building. If you look at the condition of the building now, it would cost more money to refab it. I just feel like when you see something that doesn't have a house on it, it doesn't mean it needs a house. And especially in our part of the world, we do not mind driving 10 miles to go to a grocery store or to get something to eat. I think what you do in Hampstead and Rocky Point and those other areas, that's one thing, but I just don't think you need to leave Penderley as a crossroad community.
So the next future land use category, I believe is coastal residential. And so coastal neighborhood, excuse me. So coastal neighborhood is exclusively east of Highway 17. A lot of it is already existing in developed neighborhoods, although there is a fair amount that's vacant land. This is intended to be a future land use category that is consistent with some of the development patterns in Hampstead, but recognizes the sensitivity of the environmental areas surrounding it. So prioritizing tree preservation, low impact development, conservation subdivisions, those are all things that are desired in this future land use category. And I think the way that we achieve this is through incentivizing the development style in a zoning district, is incentivizing that development style. So we certainly don't want to restrict, make things, we don't want to be heavy-handed, and we don't want to restrict how the designs of various elements of a property. I think the better way is to incentivize the types of development that we want to see, rather than in some instances require only a certain style. So we want to incentivize environmental preservation, we want to incentivize tree preservation, we want to incentivize low impact development, we want to incentivize ways to reduce stormwater impacts on the east side of US Highway 17. So there is an existing commercial waterfront future land use category in Pender 2.0. There's only a couple of areas that fall under this category, and we got rid of that category, but we recognize the value of having there be commercial waterfront uses where it makes sense. Those things that support water-based recreation, like the Lewis Road case that this board has heard a couple times. If someone has a development and they want to have a marina, something like that, those are all things that are identified as appropriate in this category.
Now, will Hawk still be doing away with that commercial
So,
stuff?
yeah,
or-
I think,
Wait, you said with the commercial stuff?
Yeah, so they have like
he's talking about well,
You said what they do.
50,000 square feet of commercial.
I
They
thought
have.
you meant that they were doing some commercial towards the waterway, like a marina.
Yes, I
That
know
was
they're
one of the
doing that.
options.
Then they had the stuff, I think, closer up to like
Yeah,
Country
they're
Club.
actually, they're still moving forward with 50,000 square foot of commercial in the front on Country Club, but I think they're changing direction with some of the stuff in the back.
Okay.
It's likely that will come in front of the planning board in the near future, so.
So will that be like kind of neighborhood, civic uses, local neighborhood uses, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think they even, I think a church use was even allowed as part of that.
Okay.
In the initial approval. But hopefully when they, just to say that there's a potential for that to be revised, but we'd like to see some more definition on what those potential uses would be.
And how does the plan encourage not clear cutting lots? And that, I didn't see any verbiage in that really encouraged that or put any limitations.
Well, it's part of the theme of environmental preservation, but that's going to be borne out through implementation of zoning regulations and through conditions placed on rezonings.
There are a few specific actions. The second action in environmental conservation and resilience is develop a tree preservation plan. So, you know, again, this is a, you know, broad, long-range plan, so it'll have specific recommendations for actions, but it is not the law or the ordinance. So this could lead to something that would become an ordinance, potentially, but it's that guidance.
Yeah,
It's our community vision, you know?
yeah.
Most of the coastal, this zoning is the northern part of Hampstead and into Surf City. Did you guys look at their future land use maps at all?
We did, yes,
Okay,
sir.
good.
Yes, sir.
All right.
So for the projects that are approved, unless they've already started something, they typically have 2 years, right? To actually take some steps towards their development,
Yes, typically.
and then they would lose their entitlements, correct?
Right.
It's, there's some gray area, but generally, yes.
Okay,
But the larger, like if it's a multi-phase project over 25 acres, like these larger projects, they can be vested for up to 7 years. So it
Okay.
depends on the scale. of the
I mean, like Hawksbill Cove, I know they did, technically they did start it because they built Transfer Station Road, so, you know, they're kind of grandfathered in, but I was thinking of some of these other guys that have gone through a lot of approvals and maybe not have broken ground and might be coming up on their 2-year, you know, cutoff. Does that make them fall into this new category, or is that like an easy renewal for them to get?
That'll be, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, that'll be something we'll have to deal with on a case-by-case basis, because there's a lot to consider. It's not as simple as saying the clock has run out. What would inform a decision there would be, part of that would be, what have they been doing at this time?
Yeah.
Like if they've been securing a traffic study, or, you know, revising certain permits, or doing certain things that we may not be aware of, that's something we would consider.
I'm just thinking from a legal perspective, like they, you know, put an offer on a piece of land, came before the planning board, got the thing approved, paid a bunch of money to buy the land, and now we come back and say, oh, you passed your 2 years, and, you know, now, by the way, the rule has changed on your land. So it's just, that's something that I think we need to consider.
Right. But yeah, that's something it's hard to speak specifically about that, because we would have to look at it case by case.
Yep.
But a lot of times, if it's, you know, if there's enough on the line for a developer, they'll challenge whatever staff's position is. If we say it's run out, a judge may feel otherwise.
Yeah.
Because there's a difference between the statutory vested rights and the common law vested rights. So we follow the statutory, but a judge could go in a different direction with making a decision that could override our own.
Sure. Okay.
The next category is residential neighborhood. I believe we've talked about that some. Would y'all prefer us to move ahead to the next one?
You can move ahead.
Okay.
Just one question on that.
Yes, sir.
So, I think instead of saying 3 to 6 units, let's pick a number of units. Like every other one of those classifications has a set number of units per acre.
Mhm.
Now, we could say 5 units, and then if they do some special sort of design, they get a, you know, whatever that separate rule is. But it's kind of that's a wide disparity. I think it could just cause issues. I think we should just call it whatever it's gonna be. 5
Everybody
units,
is
6
always gonna ask for the most.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it kind of doubles within the category, you know.
I mean, this is an area where they have public, you know, public water and wastewater, which, you know, we want to take advantage of that.
I mean, five could be more reasonable, 4 or 5.
Yeah.
That kind of narrows the gap, right, but still is within that range.
I mean, I was just, was there a reason for the kind of range, or?
It allows flexibility for those areas where, you know, maybe utility infrastructure is not available.
Okay.
Or where it could be extended to allow for higher density.
Okay, I mean, that makes sense. So maybe we just say, yeah, write something in there. This could tend down towards the lower end of the range if there's not public stuff available.
Right.
And
and at the higher end of the range if there is.
And part of it is allowing for flexibility for different product types, right? So like the 3 would make more sense for a single family, where the 5 or 6 could be more appropriate for the townhome duplexes.
Okay, understood.
triplexes, or-
But wouldn't they immediately, a developer, look to maximize its density? And they would do whatever they could to get, without paying too much, to get the highest density. And then they would probably do a conditional, and they would come and ask for tighter setbacks or something along those lines to fit that in there.
As long as we have the additional verbiage in there that says if there's not public infrastructure available, then you're at the 3, and if there is, you're at the 6. Or maybe there's
Right.
only sewer and there's no water, or there's only water and no sewer. You know, then I get the range if you're thinking about it from that
Would
perspective.
that apply if they brought their own sewer treatment plant?
They still need water to run it though.
Yep.
I think the idea, and as we go on to the subsequent
It
categories.
was just an observation. I mean,
I
yeah.
think it's good. I
Yeah.
do like the incentive to make the communities nice.
Yep.
And if you do that, or you provide a community benefit in some capacity, whether it's a collector street road or who knows what it is, that, you know, you protect open space that is sensitive, you're gonna get a little bit, you have the opportunity to have a little bit more because you're doing what we're asking you to do.
Yeah, because on top of that, like if you do those, you know, how would you class it? If you're doing the extras, the sidewalk, what does that typically entitle? If you do those extras, what does it entitle you to from a density boost?
There's no real clear answer to that. The code allows
As-
an increase in density for superior design elements.
Okay,
But
Yeah, we're trying to reel that in a little bit.
okay,
And to clarify that, that's just for, you know, like the PD district, the RM district, which the board's seen RM, I think, once or twice, more often than PD. But that's not the case for like a typical by right district in terms of incentives to get more out of it. But that's something we will certainly.
so if you're in a
consider.
district that allows, you know, let's say it allows 2 units per acre, but you do a superior design, then you could technically be entitled to some sort of increase in the density.
Potentially,
Okay,
right. More, like today, that is the case with the PD district.
yep,
But with the conditional, it could certainly support the commissioners with approving a project more in line with what the developer is seeking in terms of getting what the community wants or what would be more beneficial to the community at large, like sidewalk network, multi-use path, you know,
Yeah.
certain uses, commercial uses as part of a larger residential project.
okay.
Collector street is huge.
Right, exactly.
And that's,
things like
if
that.
we can get developers to put the collector city in faster, you know, almost just develop right along the collector street. I mean, that would really alleviate traffic and help with that. And they're the only ones who's going to do it.
Right.
I think it's important to remember, you know, again, you know, this is a broad plan, so, you know, we hopefully have an ordinance that reflects this coming forward, you know, in the coming years, and a situation where we might want to retain, you know, 3 to 6 or some sort of range is if the zoning districts, we want a little bit more specificity or flexibility in the zoning
I was
districts.
just saying,
to
you
match this.
definitely need the flexibility.
You could have like
Yeah.
a denser residential neighborhood and a less dense, and you could have a couple of flavors
Yep.
that do fall into those categories as well, so,
Okay.
yes, sir.
Can we step back to the rural neighborhood for just a second?
Yes, sir.
Along 210,
You just want to talk about Rocky Point in general?
certainly. The neighborhoods that are already along 210 though, would that not be some of those?
Along 210 between Hampstead and Rocky Point,
Yes, sir.
like Equine.
Equine Acres,
Well,
Those
Equine
are
was,
large lots.
Equine was a 10-acre exempt subdivision, so that one would, just specifically that one would be the best fit for RA.
Saratoga.
Saratoga's more medium density, I think those are.
Those are 1 acre
those are
lots.
1 acre lots, right,
All right,
But across the street,
right.
Avondale, Cross
Mhm.
Creek.
Yeah, we've got that, like the Cross Creek area we have is.
I see Cross Creek is, you know,
did you say you're going to relook at all the RP there, though, along 210 and Shaw Highway?
Yeah, I would
Southern
look
part of Shaw Highway?
It looks like, yeah, the southern part is RP, so,
Like, I think that you really look at, realistically, I think we've only seen one developer bring an RP to go RA. It was for a specific reason.
Right.
And everything else is, I don't see downzoning.
Right.
And
No,
RP is,
Right.
at minimum, a rural neighborhood. It's R15,
Right,
roughly.
right.
Does that answer? Now, this is where it kind of gets, and I'm open to full conversation here, but there is a real push for sewer in Rocky Point, whether it's coming from the south, up from Cape, potentially the Cape Fear Public Utility Authority. We have these small treatment plants that are being approved. Are those recognized, those neighborhoods recognized on the map?
Yes, sir. So Lanes Ferry is in the area. Lanes Ferry is just west of the Northeast Cape Fear River on Highway 210. That development style is sort of recognized by the residential neighborhood category. And then the triangle that is the interior of the triangle of 210, 117, and 133 all falls within that residential neighborhood area, which would be supported by a sewer line, say, running up 117.
Now, there's sewer that runs up 117, right? It's just not for really residential use. Maybe it
Right.
is for residential growth, but we've also had a special use permit that expired. That was a sewer treatment plant. We've had cases before this body that failed, but that doesn't mean they go away.
Right.
If there was a sewer treatment plant that was a municipal sewer treatment put somewhere in Rocky Point, how would that change this map?
I don't think it would change it a bit.
I mean, there's
I
RP
think-
all up and down 210 or 117, 210 and Ashton Road area and everywhere else.
Well, I think this map acknowledges that as a huge possibility, that there will be sewer there for residential.
Okay.
Or else the medium density wouldn't make sense at all.
And there's a couple of nodes of the neighborhood center at 210 and 117, and then 133 and 117 as well. That would support.
And again, the thought is keeping the development within that metropolitan WPO boundary. South of 210, but of course, the Rocky Point intersection there.
It's
Right.
trying to cluster that node. The other node, are you done? Anything else?
Go ahead.
The other node is, now this is a very rural node, but there's Burgal, which they got their own zoning. And honestly, they've redone their ordinance to allow for a lot of higher density inside their R7 district. Is up near Willard. Any thought to that?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a development that, I believe it's been approved, so it's been annexed into the town of Wallace. I believe the development has been approved. I'm not very privy to it as it's not part of the county's jurisdiction, but that's interesting and something that we talked a lot about. So we as a community often talk about development pressure pushing up from Wilmington to New Hanover County. But one thing that we wanted to be mindful of is the potential for development pressure pushing down from Wallace. There's not a ton of changes on this map that reflect necessarily expected development in that area, but that's similar to the mine in Rocky Point. If there begins to be development in that area, well, one, I would expect it might be annexed into Wallace, and two, that might be something that we need to look at revising the map.
I mean, I certainly think that as Wilmington grows and North Carolina grows,
Right.
if it goes in this current trend, that affordable housing is always going to be an issue. But to me, the most affordable housing is the cheapest land, potentially. And so people are going to also want to be able to get to live further away from those
Right.
larger, commercial areas, industrial centers. But they're going to also want to be able to get there. And so they're going to be on those, like we said, back to those, they're going to travel 40. So I just simply think that as we see Rocky Point seeing that pressure, Burgall's seeing it.
Oh, yeah.
It's just more contained to Burgall. that Wallace will be as well, because it's all on 40, and people want to live out there and they'll be willing to drive,
Right.
you know, but they still have that rural setting out there. But, you know, I'm just curious what their future land, I've done some work in Duplin. It can be challenging with some of their tax records and so forth, but
Sure.
their future land use map is pretty basic. But have you looked at that at all?
I don't know that we looked at the future land use map of Duplin or Wallace, or either.
Maybe it's Wallace.
Because
Yeah.
Duplin doesn't have zoning.
Yeah,
I
Duplin.
know.
I
Outside
don't
of the
know if they
cities.
have,
Right, they may not have a.
I'm talking about Wallace. I've looked at it. It's very simple, but it does, you know, has a lot of commercial
It does, yeah.
opportunity there.
Right.
One of the,
Has the largest Walmart I've seen in my life.
There's a
I
lot of
think.
commercial there.
Exactly.
one of the things we're trying to be respectful of as well, you know, even going back into the first community engagement window, you know, I went out and talked to the town council in Watha, and we actually met one of the counselors from St. Helena at the Rocky Point community meeting, and, you know, we understand, you know, their you know, general perspective of those communities, that they don't wanna see a lot of, you know, growth happening around them as well, and to preserve those rural, you know, character areas, you know, we try to really be respectful of that. So, you know, as proposals may come along, like Daniel was saying, that area that Wallace annexed is reflected on this map. It was a slight challenge to actually get that noted, but it is noted, on the map, up there, so.
Does a farmer have the right to break up his land in parcels 10 acres or more without any approval from the planning board or planning process?
Anyone does,
Yeah.
regardless.
So
of-
that does give a farmer the right to, if he wanted to carve off a couple of parcels for family members. Granted, it's a big, you know, big piece of land, but are they entitled to do that multiple times?
Anyone can divide into 10-acre tracts. at
With
any
just
time.
recording a surveyor map and doing it?
Right,
Okay.
as long as all the resultant parcels are 10 acres or more, it's exempt entirely.
Yeah. And for someone who has less than 10 acres, are you entitled to a free split of your land?
No, not exactly, but there are some options referred to as limited subdivisions, where you could do, like an expedited's a good example. If you have greater than 5 acres, you can divide it into no more than 3. But the
Okay.
limitation there is that you can't do that.
Is that automatic, or is that something that's still subject to approval?
Well, we have to approve it.
Yeah.
But it offers an easy option for a simple subdivision. The limitation is that you can't use that option only but once every 10 years. So
I
you have to
gotcha.
wait 10 years to do it again.
Okay.
But it does offer an easy option.
Okay.
And then another thing that's very common, if you have 2 acres, that's all you have, you can divide that into no more than 3 parcels. So like if you have RP, you could do an easy subdivision right then and there, that's exempt.
Okay. I'm just thinking options, because
Two
we
or
were talking
less.
about it earlier, options for like a farmer or something that wanted to carve some lots off.
There are a lot of options.
Okay.
There's a lot of options, and we deal with those every day. There's a family subdivision option, which works similarly to the expedited that I mentioned.
Okay.
The other part of this corridor of 40 is where Central Park is. The county's putting a massive amount of investment for recreation in the western part of the county in that location. I believe there's sewer there as well. Is there any thought, discussion on why that's going to keep remaining RA? I mean, I understand you want to keep the character and feel, but you may have, you know, people that want to live next to the park.
Well, part of it is acknowledging that Burgaw and St. Helena, and you mentioned them as well, have their own zoning power. Burgaw's a better example in terms of drawing people. You know, people come from all over the county to shop and
Sure.
and do all that. Burgaw, especially the grocery store out there. We want that growth to be directed to Burgaw, so we preserve the RA designation, you know, between St. Helena and Rocky Point, and Burgaw up to even Wallace as RA to let them continue to be that draw for people, and while preserving the rural kind of atmosphere in between.
The other complication to that, from my understanding, with just the nature of that sewer line that goes between Burgaw
Yeah.
and Wallace is
Pressure.
that, and I am not a sewer expert, but the velocity or large capacity of that being, you know, a large point A to point B line, it's harder to tap into for kind of a regular user.
But that, maybe that's something we could explore, you know, in the next 20,
I'm not
25
saying
years from now.
apartments next to the
Right.
park and rural,
Sure.
you know, I was thinking, you know, that there's gonna be, that park will create traffic. Okay, it's also kids out there playing ball, adults playing whatever,
Yeah.
walking it. That there's gonna potentially be other needs that the people that frequent that park may want. And it may not just be housing, it may be, you know, to where you need to drive 10 minutes, 15 minutes down the road just to get the Gatorade,
Right.
you know? It's just something to think about, how, what the parks, how do they impact communities, and,
Right.
I mean, it's a big one,
Yeah.
you know, so I think it's gonna have a serious draw of people.
And
And if you ever get hotels, you'll have tournaments out there and
Right.
people coming to visit,
Exactly.
to spend money, you know, in our community.
Exactly.
and a lot of it is zoned RP around the park.
Yeah, so-
currently, right, there's a lot of large pockets of that.
So I'm just thinking,
No,
you know,
that's a good
down,
idea.
you know, a lot of us live today. We see today, we want to try to keep the character of our community today, but things change, it's inevitable. I'm always putting the hat on and saying, we're the planning board. When will this map most likely be revised? 10, 15, 20 years down the road, maybe longer. So I'm always thinking, 20 years from now, 10 years from now, how will that change? What will the residents need?
Right.
Because of this new amenity or something that's in that area. How is the bypass going to change our life? Well, you're doing it, you're showing.
Right.
Are we thinking about that along that way as well?
Exactly.
Let me pose a question, if I may. Just, I've just been thinking about this. I mean, what would y'all's thoughts be if this were the 2200 plan, or the 2100 plan? If there was a further horizon, but yet we were showing the same product?
that's too far.
Is that, I mean, you know what I mean, as far as, I don't know, that may be an odd question, but,
Everything south of Burgall.
When is the,
like, this isn't the tomorrow plan is my point, right?
Okay. But I mean, when are you looking to get this into effect? Like, what is the?
So-
Sorry, go
Well, I
ahead.
was
We
just
didn't talk
the
about that.
plan, we're hoping to have it in effect, you know, fall. It depends on the Coastal Resource Commission approving it, cause it's a CAMA plan as well, so we anticipate having this in front of this board in the next couple of months for your recommendation of approval before we take it to the Coastal Resource Commission and then Board of Commissioners, but it's to be implemented, not all in one day, over time.
Mhm.
The idea is that this is what the county could look like in 2050.
It's what we want it to look like.
Right.
So to ask your question about 2100, I think that you would have to consider that every single approved development is completely built out.
Right.
So that means Rocky Point is its own municipality almost, could be. Scotts Hill could be its own municipality if it wanted to be almost larger than Hampstead potentially.
Right.
So what does that do? It draws traffic, you know, businesses and so forth. I think Wallace grows, just like I said, naturally. I think I-40, and this is all given that we have a consistent business climate, you know, that our state, because everything in the county is driven by the state. I mean, everything up there drives kind of how we live and how businesses are attracted here. But the general trajectory is that this area could be, you know, how many, 70,000 people here? We may have 125,000 people, 130,000 people living if you keep going up 10, 20% every year, maybe more. I think Jacksonville's gonna grow. You have a whole battalion of Marines moving from Pendleton that got slowed down during COVID to live in the Jacksonville area. That means Maple Hill may see pressure, you know, because if you just take, I know you've shown this every time, you draw a circle around these large metropolitan areas, a driving distance of 30 minutes is not a bad commute. So how does that impact us? So unless people stop wanting to move to North Carolina and stop wanting to move here, and they all can no longer work from home and stuff, you know, we're gonna continue to see people moving here, unfortunately or fortunately. And so I think these metropolitan circles will just be continue to put pressure further and further out, just like, because there's nowhere else to go. We're not going to the ocean. We gotta go, they're gonna go some way. And unfortunately, Pender County is right there along that I-40 line.
Well, at some point, there's gonna be nothing but metropolitan urban growth.
I don't
areas,
think so
right?
completely. I think that the far western, I think I-40 is going to see it because it just has the infrastructure.
Right.
421 will see some, but I do think a lot of that will stay agricultural.
And when I say eventually, I'm thinking way.
7,500 years?
Right. Down the road.
If we look at the next couple categories, these are our higher intensity categories. So neighborhood center, regional center, those are our highest intensity of residential density. So neighborhood center are areas generally Hampstead, Scotts Hill, around the bypass, and then in Rocky Point. The primary use is commercial, and then higher density residential is allowed or appropriate in these areas. What's inappropriate is low density development, right? So these are not areas where we're expecting to see half-acre, acre lots. These are, townhomes, small-scale multifamily buildings, commercial development, office-type development, services for the existing residents in those areas. It's definitely going to be served by municipal-type water and sewer. It's going to require that. And those are areas where we're also thinking about a sense of place, because it is a more municipal style of development, your traditional municipal style of development, as opposed to more rural, traditional county style of development. And the regional center is similar, but just a little bit higher, incrementally higher intensity. So this is where you would see the apartment complexes. This is where you might see, more intense commercial development that is bigger box retailer, large grocery stores. That's where you're going to see those types of uses. And then, something that we've never seen in this area is, at least in my time that I can recall, is like the commercial on the ground floor with residential on top. And I'm not saying that that's something that we would mandate per se, but this is where it would be allowed. This is where it would make sense to happen. Less reliance on driving from place to place, more options for walking or biking to get to the places where you live, where you work, where you recreate, and where you get to services.
Why doesn't that, if I'm looking at it correctly, the regional center,
Yes, sir.
why doesn't it extend further up 17 from 210? Like, I would think that could potentially even go past the bypass.
So what
Yeah.
we thought about was, we wanted to concentrate it. We wanted it to be concentrated dense development, not sprawled dense development all the way along 17. So the concentration of that regional center in the downtown Hampstead, where 210 and 17 come together, was the focus. The concentration in Scotts Hill near the county line is the focus. And then the areas in between, say where the bypass comes in to 17 north of Hoover, those areas will allow for, medium density level of residential development with those supporting commercial, residential scale or appropriate scale commercial development. So we didn't want it to just be sprawled, high-intensity development. We certainly wanted to be responsive to the community and the feedback that we got from residents in the area. And so that was our attempt to
Okay.
achieve that balance.
If there becomes a situation where before 2050, it looks exactly like this, envisions, then, things can change and
Sure.
adapt as well.
So then we transition into the non-residential categories. So we have economic development, which the highlight here is that we've moved that or extended it north on 421. So that is pushed north on 421. And that's a result of a couple of things. The development pattern pushing up from New Hanover County, the success of Pender County's Commerce Park. And when I say development pushing up from New Hanover County, on that 421 corridor, there's a lot of industrial development on the New Hanover County side. the success of the county's Commerce Park and the desirability of that area for industrial scale development. So we talked a lot about, proximity to the port, access to a major highway in US Highway 421, quick access to Interstate 40. You can get on Highway 74 to get to 95. You've got water and sewer service. There's electrical service there. Those are all things that, as we understand it, industrial development is looking for. And so those are all in that area. So it made sense for that development pattern to continue up 421 more so than is reflected on the current map. And then around it, we had, recognizing the need that I think you talked about earlier, Mr. Buchanan, there, for those, if and when those industrial style developments come, there need to be places for folks who work there to live. And so we have the rural neighborhood around it, as well as the neighborhood center at Blueberry Road, where there can be a little bit higher density development to support that workforce housing. So that's the biggest change as it relates to the economic development areas. And then we kind of talked about heavy commercial, which is the red category. That's in response to feedback that we received from the steering committee, feedback that we've received from the planning board, and also feedback that we get on a day-to-day basis from folks calling in saying, I cannot find, I'm a plumber, I'm a HVAC technician, I cannot find areas or space in Hampstead or Rocky Point to have a business. I don't need a big storefront. I don't necessarily need road frontage. It's not a retail operation, but I need a place to operate. And so that was the impetus for the heavy commercial category, to try and identify those areas where maybe it makes sense for a storage facility. It's not directly along Highway 17. There are plenty of policies in PENDER 2.0 that talk about discouraging storage facilities on Highway 17. Maybe it's a good place for boat and RV storage. Maybe it's a good place where a plumber can have a showroom, but also a bigger warehouse space behind them. So that was the impetus for the heavy commercial category. We didn't want to necessarily call it industrial because we didn't feel like it was an industrial style of development, but it wasn't the traditional commercial that folks may think of when they talk about services that support residential development.
Mobile businesses where they go to your home, but they gotta have a place to do work,
Right.
type thing.
Could
Exactly.
even be like a caterer.
Yeah.
Even.
There's medical companies that do
Right.
that, right?
Exactly. So that was, that was the kernel that led to this category.
I like that. I like the flexibility a lot with this plan when it comes to the commercial aspects, right? I know there's some disagreement with rural crossroads in one area, but
Sure.
I think rural crossroads in general makes sense because a lot of times there are already existing business there.
Right.
You're just saying, hey, we're gonna define it,
Right.
and the crosswalks and so forth, because I'm up in Maple Hill all the time, and, it's hard to walk across one location to the other. It's,
Exactly.
but I do also like the Country Club Road with allowing these little mom and pops to come in and kind of carve out a little business there, and I'm sure we can talk about parking for that in the future too. And just kind of, that seems to be a trend that's working. We have the trailing spouse syndrome where a Marine moves in, an officer or a Marine moves in, their wife doesn't have a job, what they do doesn't exist here anymore, so how can you allow them to find opportunities that may be different with these industrial, light and heavy commercial could allow different opportunities in there.
Exactly.
I was just looking at, so on that residential neighborhood, we've got that, the nursing home that's down on Country Club.
Yeah.
Should you say, it's discourage uses, multifamily residential, more than 6 dwellings in a building? I guess that's
That's a
wouldn't be
different
classified
category.
as residential.
Yeah,
But neighborhood, does that fall under neighborhood scale institutional?
It could.
Or should you outline nursing home there? Because, you know, I know there's talk of a few of those, new ones coming to,
And if they get rid of, did they get rid of the certificate of need?
Not yet.
Not yet. If they get rid of the certificate of need, you'll see them pop up.
yeah, and I've also heard at one point, the Hawksbill Cove plan had like a nursing facility in there as well. And it's something that there's not a lot of, and I think we shouldn't discourage that.
Definitely
In the
not.
secondary uses, it notes age-restricted retirement housing. You know, perhaps we could, or. You know,
I just think we need a little
nursing
clarity on that one, that to say, to allow like a nursing facility.
Yes, sir.
Or,
That's definitely a need we heard.
yeah, senior housing / nursing, I mean, there's a lot of places that are, you know, seniors that are still somewhat independent.
So-
Not necessarily at the nursing care, you know, level, but just kind of a group living environment.
Right.
So you have in that world, I've worked in that world. Out of the hospital, it's like the post-acute, you know, you go to the hospital, have something happen, break a hip, maybe if it's an issue with congestive heart failure or something. And there's a nursing home, but it usually has a skilled component to it, right? And like, that's gonna be your traffic with people coming and going, so that has a traffic component to it. But it's, you know, very quiet and so forth, and, you know, folks are, and then there's usually a component to like long-term care, right? Where folks are there, you know, for the end of their life, they're having trouble, it's very difficult. And then there's usually a component that's like someone who may be a Medicare recipient, they fall, they break their hip, they gotta spend a couple weeks in rehab. That's the skilled nursing home, like, why am I blanking
Like
on that
I
name?
call it a rehab center in
Yeah,
a way.
rehab, but
Yeah.
there's usually a long-term care component
Yeah.
to that. The one in Hampton actually has another wing that's an assisted care too.
Right.
Right, so
they
assisted
have
care is,
memory care, they have
yeah,
rehab.
the resident typically can walk.
But then there's just
you
the
know,
lowest level, which is just group living. Seniors wanna
Independent
come
living.
together and kind of count
Independent.
on each other.
That'd be an independent living center.
Independent living. So I think, I just know based on, you know, if you look at the demographics of Hampstead, haven't looked at it in a while, but it was very top heavy at the older age bracket. And I know kids have followed, you know, their parents. And at some point, those parents are gonna be going into places like this. And I think that we need to, you know, have options available for them. Otherwise, the kids are gonna leave and they're gonna leave. If it's not here.
Well, no, the other end, and we've talked about it, is that at some point, there's a chance that one of the parents is gonna end up having to live near but, you know, we talk about, we don't want them living underneath our roof.
Right.
And then to have outbuildings and things like
Well,
that, and have that flexibility.
The aging in place concept is certainly strong, it's expensive to do
Yeah.
that. Most of the residents who either go to Woodbury Wellness, that's the place, or they go to the Davis community, which has assisted care and so forth. So certainly there's a need for that, but there's also a large trend of home health. And home health is, you know, amazing what they can do now, heroic medicine. And so, and most people don't wanna go to those places. They wanna
Yeah.
stay in home and age in place. And so that's
So
also
I mean,
something there.
that's a good point. So that's like a lot of the home health businesses is kind of a civic, kind of local, if you can have that local down the street. And there's lots of mom and pops that are forming to do that, you know, to provide that service. So having that available or allowed in the neighborhood area is great. And then, you know, in areas like this where there's, you know, where there's water and sewer, public infrastructure, I think that, you know, and the example being Woodbury, that we make sure we account for that.
That's a great
Yeah.
point.
One question that got brought up the last time when we talked about this, and with the presentation that we had on what the desired percentage of agricultural, residential, commercial, is that taken into account with how this future because I think the percentage that Adam said last time that we met, or 2 times ago that we met, was around like 20% commercial. Was that?
Yeah, 25 to 30%, just residential to non-residential tax base. That's just what our consultant relayed to me.
So do we eliminate from the denominator like all of the RA or the RA to come up with that, and how closely do we come to, if this is fully built out with this vision, to come to that 20% commercial intended?
No, we didn't do a study like that, and part of it is it would be a range. We would have to make a lot of estimates, and that's something that we can do. I think that's an interesting idea and something worth pursuing. But it would be an educated guess at best, because we're talking about allowing for flexibility in land use, rather than trying to restrict what people can do to only one type of development. So what we don't necessarily want to do is say you can only do commercial on Highway 17 with a 300-foot buffer off of Highway 17 in that area. You can only do commercial to try and achieve a better balance of the tax base. I'm not saying that, I mean, it would be great if those types, if the balanced tax base happened organically. I'm not sure that that's realistic, but what we tried to do with this plan is allow for situations where we don't have to tell people no when they say, I own some property on Country Club and I'm interested in doing a barber shop, or I'm interested in having a small little office building or something like that. Because the way it's set up now is that's really just not feasible. We did have a land use alternatives analysis completed where they studied our future land use map as it is now, and then not exactly what the future land use map is here, but sort of a version, an iteration of it. And I could share some of that information with the board. It was kind of spit out on a spreadsheet with some interesting information. But that's a long-winded way, I feel like, of answering your question, to say, no, we did not do an analysis to specifically see if this would balance the fiscal distribution in the county. But I think that would be an interesting exercise.
Well, if you're looking to get to a goal and your plan is there,
Yeah.
that should be pointing you towards, if we adhere to this, then it'll get us at least close to
Right.
the mark. Maybe it may
Exactly.
not get us all the way. Because then that also, if you're consistent with the land use plan, you're consistent with the zoning plan, and everybody's driving the same way, and we don't have a lot of rezone, and you say, no, like, this isn't consistent, and we're not gonna rezone, we're not gonna spot zone, but right now, if it all doesn't come to that 20% or close to that, then, somebody can come in and try to blow up everything that you're trying to do and say, well, this is helping, and just because it's not, but if we're planning, if the plan's not worth anything because it's not driving to the end result, then why do we have a plan?
Part of it is, I'm sorry to interrupt, but part of it is there has to be a certain amount of residential to support the commercial. And so that's something that we're seeing, and I think Hampstead has finally reached that tipping point, because the number of applications that we get for commercial development has certainly increased over the, since I started here, where it was like exclusively residential. So,
There's a lot more to that.
Right.
Than just the plan, because there's the market, there's land values, interest rates, things that we have no control over. A developer has to want to bring it to make it happen. The private sector has to want to play ball. And they may look at your plan and say, that's cool, but there's no market there for that right now. And then, or they may say, but there is a market for that one piece here. It's close to your red, but it's not exactly on it. But I'd like to rezone that one piece that it's touching. And that's when you're like, well, that would help. But is that completely consistent with the plan? We've seen that.
But if you hold that for the commercial, because that's where, long-term, that's where the best place is for the long-term growth, and then don't allow for residential development in that area. Because I think that's what you're trying to stop.
Yes, I think that, I I haven't seen many people come, have we seen a lot of people trying to rezone commercial to residential? Usually the highest and best use, is industrial, most valuable, and then you work your way down. But most developers are gonna know that, but yeah, I don't think if you market that, I agree with you, like you say, this is for commercial growth, and someone wants to put some townhomes in there, you're probably gonna be like, that's not consistent with our plan. But if they came to you and said, hey, listen, you've built this whole thing out, and there's another 20 acres right next to it, then I would like to rezone that. I know it's not consistent, it's RA on your map, but it's right next to this commercial thing. Can I rezone this and put in more out? You may say yeah to that, because it's not exactly on the location, but it fits inside our plan to a degree, because it's a living, breathing document a little bit. We gotta adjust with how the market works. I think, landowners don't always wanna sell, and then they do wanna sell. And someone says, hey, I'll buy this land, but I wanna do this with it. It's somewhat consistent, but not completely consistent. But it does align with us trying to get more commercial tax revenue. I'm not sure that really answers the question, but it's just kind of how I look at it.
One thing, in terms of what Mr. Keeler was asking, I think the way we've set up these districts compared to the previous plan does get closer to that goal, right? By offering a more mixture of uses in all of these different categories. So previously, in the way a lot of the zoning districts work now, it's pretty much all or nothing. Either you do residential, no commercial, even allowed, even to be considered, or vice versa, just commercial, we're not even gonna consider residential. Here, the way all these districts are set up, it's based on intensity, but it does allow for both and supports both. We're not gonna see general business countywide, but hopefully we do see residential and then commercial kind of spread out throughout, and then hopefully over time it starts to bridge those gaps and better kind of diversify that breakdown.
And just because it's on the map and it's consistent with land use map, doesn't mean we may approve something.
Right.
There could be things that you come say, well, it's consistent, but man, you're in between two neighborhoods and you're trying to put another neighborhood right in the middle of that. We may need to see this conditional so that we can understand, because you're impacting a lot of people. Yeah, your idea is consistent, but there's uses in there, consistency that we don't want to see right here. Take a conditional, and then that gives us kind of back into our play to being able to shape what we want to see there.
Right. And so to speak to that point, Mr. Buchanan, which is a great point, if we're not intending to rezone this, there a new zoning map that reflects this tomorrow, right? Because that would be too much change too fast. But we want to look at individual level, case by case, with conditional zoning ideally, to see how these specific ideas fit into this bigger picture. And then we can kind of see if, the broader area supports this, but this exact parcel is in a different category, but maybe it does make more sense. Because we weren't able to look at every single parcel in terms of the evaluation, right? We wish we had time to do that. But one of the other things that we talked about with this plan, and I think the plan speaks to, is in the future focusing on small area plans. Do a land use plan specific for your Penderley, specific for your Rocky Points, where we can really take the time to spend on those. Like previously, I think 15 years ago or so, they did a small area plan in Maple Hill, right, where it did that exact exercise with that community. We haven't seen that come to fruition really, because there just hasn't been a lot of development pressure or market-driven forces coming out there. But that's the idea, to take the time over time with these individual areas and look at them more closely.
And when you did all this, stormwater, was that was taken into consideration with, because I know where I am in Rocky Point, it's good to see that there's the orange on the one side of the 117, because I know that those properties is all timberland right now, and it doesn't perk, but as soon as you bring in sewer to that area, and if they can develop it and bring in dense, but where's that water gonna go? And once all that brown is developed where Fallbrook is, none of that property in that area flooded during Florence and those other water events. But once you bring in those 3,000 homes or any kind of density, we're gonna be in the same position as New Anarch County. And just because other people have done it around us, we just don't wanna be in that same position. We should be learning from that.
I was assuming we're putting a little bit more stringent stormwater standards in the next round.
That was one of the, I think Adam or Justin talked about that, but that was one of the things that we heard everywhere, whether it was Willard, Maple Hill, Hampstead, Scottsdale, stormwater, drainage issues. That was a common thread.
I mean, I lived in Carolina Beach for 12 years and was that, and the fact that over the I moved out, what, probably 10 years ago or something like that, but the last 10 years, and people are surprised that now all of a sudden properties that have been there for 30 years are getting flooded. Well, all the undeveloped properties around them are now developed and backfilled.
Right.
And so where's that water going? And same thing's gonna happen as we continue to build. So as long as we know it's gonna happen, but we can control how dense that is and how it is done with these market forces.
Just to give y'all an idea of some of the actions in the later part of the plan, there are those specific recommendations that do address stormwater. There's, just to give a flavor, enhance riparian buffers, consider establishing an engineering department, enhance stormwater management, consider stormwater control requirements beyond state minimums, establish a stormwater and ditch management, maintenance program, develop stormwater master plans, reduce stormwater discharge. So there's a lot of items that, the county can, look to and work on, as the board, desires to address those items, or that, to address stormwater concerns.
And we did, oh, sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say that covers all of the future land use categories on the new map. As Adam was getting to, there are policies, the board may recall, I'm sure y'all do. Every time we have a presentation on a rezoning, a text amendment, a master plan, we reference policies that either support or oppose the development. There are policies, there are recommended actions, so things that staff needs to be doing, things that other departments in the county should be doing. That's another part of the plan, and so I certainly encourage the board to take a look at those and participate in the feedback. But if there are any other questions, certainly happy to address them.
Sure. Nothing's coming to mind right now, but I want to go around the table.
Yeah.
But Mr. Pitts, you served on the steering committee with Mr. Jordan, who wasn't with us. Was there anything else from your perspective as a planning board member and a steering committee member that was of highlight that you want to reference, whether it's for this meeting or just in general for our future land use map?
Just the same comments I've had sort of from the beginning. I think that this map sort of misses the mark on that 210 corridor.
Mm-hmm.
I think anything that is involved in the WMPO stuff should be sort of looked at as
The metropolitan area.
sooner than later, looking like stuff that's in New Hanover County, moving this way.
So maybe we need to focus
Yeah, we'll take a
at
look
least
at that.
inside the WMPO, like we're talking about, like looking at it a little more carefully.
Right.
And we'll drill it down.
Collector streets, I think, are gonna definitely
Yeah.
change some of the appropriate uses in certain places.
Right.
We may build collector streets that become crossroads.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's probably about it.
No, I think I had all my comments during the meeting, and I think consistency between, I think that's one of the key components, I think, with this map, is consistency with what's already done that won't be changed, should, I think, be reflected.
That's a theme that we've been talking about for like 3 or 4 years, and one of the reasons one of the frustrations we had as a planning board was that these folks would come to rezone something, and there's like, well, it's been there for 30 years, it's been a bit, and it's not, but it's zoned RP,
Yeah.
and it's not even recognized on the maps.
Yeah.
So I think that's very important to get that consistent.
Because I don't like, when you point to the land use plan, and that's what our guiding principle is as a planning board, and that's what to the county commissioners, that's what you want the developers, what you want the community to take a look at on what we're supposed to do. But it's only good when it fits what we want it to fit. So if you're in behind, whether it be a developer or if you're against it, as long as the land use plan fits with what I'm trying to, that's what we're going by. But if we don't agree with that project, then be damned the land use plan, and then we're gonna do whatever we wanna do, and I don't like that. So if we want to have this as tight as possible so that we can just point to it and be consistent with it and everybody knows what they're doing.
Yeah. Understood.
How often will the maps be updated?
State law says it has to be updated, and I don't remember the term, reasonably often. So it was,
It's nice and vague.
yeah, so it's been 7
Ish.
years since the last plan was adopted. You know, I think with the pace at which we're growing, I would say no more than 10 years.
That's what my concern was.
Yeah.
We're going to implement this slowly, but at a rate that probably is less than the growth, and everything's going to change. So I think we're always going to be behind the 8 ball if we don't update it more frequently and try to implement it quicker.
Right.
Is there any other area besides what we were talking about with the WMPO, like 210 and South? Because that's what we're thinking most of, we're gonna see that immediately, or we're seeing it now. Is there any other areas that you think that we should be looking at that may see that with a?
I think
10
anything
years?
along 40, the major
Yeah.
road. Anything along 40, I think is gonna become, it's your route to Raleigh.
Yes.
It's the route between the
So on
major.
40, would you say the intersections, the nodes?
40 is extremely important. I travel it often, and it's really the only major way to get to another major city of Raleigh, and it's the connection to down here. So where in particular, the places that are building up now, Burgaw especially, just anything along there, I think is just going to, and I think it's not necessarily residential. I think it might be more industrial, more,
So staff said that they kind of left that 40 area in the areas around Watha and Burgaw alone, and Wallace, because a lot of the community wants to keep it rural agriculture, and also because they kind of don't want to infringe on the commercial activity or potential of those communities, which are part of our community as well, because, you know, they control the zoning, but we still get tax revenue from them. Is there anything specific that's missing? We talked about the parks going there and looking at potential uses there. We talked about the Willard, you know, Burgall's kind of covered up that area. Shaw Highway intersects up there. We have that gas station, but we talked about the Willard area intersection being somewhat more associated with Wallace.
nothing in particular. Like I said, it's just, I feel like,
Need to focus on that and just think about it some more.
the rural agricultural along that narrow route, kind of like what we've done for, 210 is building up. I think 40 is gonna be the same.
Okay. I agree. I do think that you're gonna see more growth at 40 as well.
It's
A lot of swampy land over there though.
Yeah,
too.
but it's the main thoroughfare.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the only connection between up north and down here.
Yep.
To Ms. Meister's point, there's been a little bit of attempt, I guess, in the past to do some industrial in the Rocky Point area. I think there were some industrial buildings in the Burgaw area,
We
right around
approved
the
one.
interchange. Probably be unpopular, but would it be maybe appropriate at the 390 interchange?
I just
Explore?
drew an arrow there and said further. We talked about that.
And that would sort of piggyback off of Wallace, right? You know, you've got,
There's solar farms over there, aren't there?
I think that's, one thing that we talked about is if there's likely much development of scale there, they would incorporate. If it is industrial development, then maybe not.
And
So that's something that, yeah, we can take a look at.
Yeah, currently there is, some general business zoning at that interchange.
Is there?
At 90, yeah. There was a plan approved for some sort of like truck stop, sort of gas station years and years ago, but they never moved forward with it. So there was definitely some interest there.
It would, we talk about industrial or whatever, commercial, heavier commercial jobs. You're gonna wanna keep that on the highway, so they're not driving through roads and communities, keep them on the interstates and the major state highways.
especially like the warehousing type
Mhm.
of jobs.
And that could be an opportunity where you get off the highway and there's warehouses there, you know, or something along those lines.
I know there's a little bit of that just north, in Wallace on the 384 exit. If you get off there, there's some industrial.
Right.
385 is where the Boar's Head is.
Yep, so 384 would be the, yeah,
Right.
yep. And I think strategically, you're, you know, still somewhat close to the state port, but you're also not terribly far out of Raleigh at that point.
Yeah, and there's also that airport up there that recently received a lot of grant money to
Right.
expand it, which I would believe would allow for potentially commercial activity.
And that's, we have the heavy commercial around that.
Okay.
In that area.
Any other thoughts, Ms. Mosker?
Sorry.
That's okay, no.
Mr. Bedwin?
No further comments.
Okay. Where do we go from here?
Well, next meeting, if you wanna talk about that, but,
For this, for our involvement with this
Oh,
and you
okay.
guys.
so we will, right now, the projection is to have this in front of the planning board in August for recommendation. We're gonna take all the feedback that we get, by the end of June 6th, consolidate all of that, review all the feedback, have a steering committee meeting, and give the steering committee one last opportunity to give us feedback, and review the feedback that we got, and then we're gonna put together the final draft. We'll certainly share that with the planning board, and then we'll be bringing it before the board for, recommendation. So if you have anything that comes to mind after this meeting, I encourage you to send it to us, before too long.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
There was a little comment earlier, I just want to circle back on that. These maps, once they're incorporated, how does that impact tax value?
I spoke to someone in the tax office about that, and I don't believe they impact tax value at all.
I didn't think so.
You're right.
It just is a guiding map for, like I said, staff and the community, but also development community to say, this is where we're gonna come here because this is what they want.
Right.
So there's a higher likelihood we're gonna be able to accomplish what we're trying to invest in because these maps are consistent with what our plan is.
Right.
Then, once it's developed or rezoned or entitled, is when property value tends to go up.
Right.
Now, if you rezone your property, that could impact your tax value.
Right.
But just a map saying what something has, there's no impact on it.
Exactly.
Okay. All right,
If the zoning is changed to reflect the map, then that could.
sure, yes. Our meeting's in Hampstead
Yes, sir.
in 2 weeks.
Yes, sir. That is June 3rd, 7 p.m. here at the annex.
Okay. Thank you for coming, everyone, and I hope it was informative. This is, like I said, an informal meeting. We'll probably have a true public hearing and public statements and so forth in cases to be heard at the next meeting. If you have, watching at home or here, if you have questions, please contact staff about your further, and please invite your friends and family and other residents and neighbors to attend these meetings to give your feedback, and it's much appreciated.
Last one's tomorrow night in Burgall.
Tomorrow night in Burgall
5.
at 5. Okay, motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Seconded. All in favor of that?
Aye.